Sprinkle a thin layer of cinnamon across a seed tray where seedlings have begun collapsing and the warm brown powder looks almost too ordinary to matter. It came from the kitchen, costs less than $2, and smells more like baking than plant medicine. Yet gardeners use it against fungus, on fresh cuttings, and even across ant trails. Some call it a natural fungicide. Others say it does almost nothing. The truth depends on what problem the gardener is actually trying to solve. If you've spent any time around gardening forums, seed starting groups, or backyard gardeners, you've probably seen cinnamon recommended as a cure for almost everything. A little mold on potting soil? Sprinkle cinnamon. Seedlings falling over? Cinnamon. Fresh plant cutting? Cinnamon. Ants marching across a container? Cinnamon again. It sounds almost too simple. How can the same pantry spice be recommended for fungi, insects, cuttings, and seedlings all at once? And more importantly, does it actually work? The answer is more interesting than most gardeners realize, because cinnamon is neither a miracle cure nor a complete myth. It sits somewhere in the middle. In some situations, it can genuinely help. In others, it distracts gardeners from the real cause of the problem. And understanding that difference may save far more seedlings than the cinnamon itself. The story begins with a spice rack. Long before cinnamon became a gardening hack, it was already one of the most familiar ingredients in kitchens around the world. It was inexpensive, easy to find, pleasant to handle, and associated with natural antimicrobial properties. Unlike many commercial garden products, it didn't require special equipment, safety gear, or a trip to the garden center. So gardeners started experimenting. When mold appeared on the surface of seed trays, cinnamon was sprinkled over the soil. When seedlings seemed vulnerable, cinnamon was dusted around their stems. When cuttings were taken from houseplants, gardeners coated the fresh cuts. When ants appeared in containers, cinnamon was scattered along their trails. Over time, stories spread. One gardener would report cleaner-looking soil after using cinnamon. Another would swear it helped prevent fungal growth. Someone else would claim it worked as a rooting aid. Before long, cinnamon developed an almost legendary reputation in some gardening circles. But there was a problem. Not every gardener saw the same results. Some people reported healthier seedlings. Others sprinkled cinnamon repeatedly, while seedlings continued collapsing day after day. Some cuttings rooted successfully. Others failed despite generous amounts of cinnamon. And this is where the story becomes interesting, because cinnamon is not really the main character. The growing conditions are. To understand why, we need to look at what cinnamon actually contains. This is where cinnamon stops being a kitchen spice and starts becoming plant chemistry. Cinnamon comes from the bark of trees in the cinnamomum family. Inside that bark are naturally occurring aromatic compounds responsible for the spice's distinctive smell and flavor. One of the most well-known compounds is cinnamaldehyde. This molecule contributes much of cinnamon's characteristic aroma and has been studied for antimicrobial and antifungal properties. Researchers have observed that concentrated cinnamon extracts and essential oils can affect certain fungi and microorganisms under specific conditions. That sounds promising, but there is an important distinction that often gets lost when gardening advice travels from one person to another. The kitchen powder and the laboratory extract come from the same plant, but they are not the same dose, the same concentration, or the same treatment. That distinction matters enormously. A scientific study involving concentrated extracts does not automatically prove that a light dusting of grocery store cinnamon will produce identical results in a seed tray. Many gardeners hear that cinnamon has antifungal properties and immediately assume the powder will behave like a commercial fungicide. But real life is usually more complicated. The powder contains some of the same compounds, but in a far less concentrated form. That doesn't mean cinnamon is useless. It means expectations need to match reality. And nowhere is that more important than with one of the most feared seed starting problems in gardening: damping off. Every gardener who starts seeds eventually encounters it. One day, the seedlings look healthy. The next day, several have collapsed. Tiny stems suddenly appear pinched, thin, and weak near the soil line. Sometimes seeds never emerge at all. Other times, young sprouts seem healthy for a few days before falling over without warning. It can feel mysterious and frustrating, especially for beginners. But damping off is not caused by a single organism. Instead, several soil-borne pathogens can contribute to the problem. These organisms thrive under conditions that gardeners accidentally create every day. Excess moisture, poor airflow, crowded seedlings, cool temperatures, contaminated containers, weak light. The result is a perfect environment for disease. This is where cinnamon enters the conversation, because some gardeners believe a dusting of cinnamon helps reduce surface fungal growth around seedlings. And in certain situations, that may be partially true. But there is a critical limitation. Once a seedling has folded at the soil line, cinnamon cannot rebound rebuild the damaged stem. At that point, the real lesson is not how to save the fallen seedling. It is how to protect the ones still standing. That distinction changes everything, because successful gardeners eventually learn that damping off prevention matters far more than damping off treatment. And this leads to an important question. If cinnamon is not a cure, why do some gardeners swear by it? The answer reveals something fascinating about how garden remedies often work. Imagine two gardeners facing the same problem. Both notice mold appearing on seed trays. Both worry about fungal issues. Both decide to sprinkle cinnamon. But one gardener also starts watering less frequently. They improve airflow. They move the tray into brighter conditions. They remove affected seedlings. They allow the soil surface to dry slightly between waterings. A week later, the tray looks healthier. What gets the credit? The cinnamon. But the reality may be much broader. The improvement often comes from the combination of changes. The cinnamon may contribute something at the surface level, but the environmental corrections are usually doing most of the heavy lifting. And this is why two gardeners can use the same cinnamon and get completely different results. One changes the conditions, the other changes only the powder. The fungus on the surface is only part of the story. The powder may help, but only after the gardener fixes the condition that allowed the problem to begin. And that brings us to the mistake that keeps damping off alive. Most gardeners focus on what they can see: a little white growth on the soil, a fuzzy patch near a stem, a suspicious spot in a tray. Naturally, they want to treat the visible symptom, so they reach for cinnamon, but the powder was treating the surface. The real problem was living deeper in the tray. Wet potting mix remains wet. Poor drainage remains poor. Crowded seedlings remain crowded. Dirty containers remain contaminated. Weak airflow remains weak. Cool temperatures remain cool. Cinnamon may discourage some fungus, but it cannot create airflow. It cannot drain a pot, separate crowded seedlings, or correct daily overwatering. Those conditions determine whether disease continues thriving. Many gardeners spend weeks searching for the perfect powder, spray, or additive when the solution is actually environmental management. The healthiest seed trays often come from remarkably simple practices: clean containers, fresh seed starting mix, good light, adequate warmth, reasonable spacing, careful watering, consistent airflow. These are not exciting answers, but they are usually the effective ones. And that same pattern appears again when cinnamon is used on cuttings. If you've ever propagated plants, you've probably seen this advice. Take a fresh cutting and dip the cut end into cinnamon. The idea sounds logical. After all, a fresh cut is essentially an open wound. Gardeners worry about fungi and bacteria entering that wound before roots can develop. Since cinnamon may have mild antimicrobial properties, it seems like a natural choice. In some cases, a light coating may indeed help keep the surface cleaner while the wound begins to heal. But this is where many gardeners make a leap that isn't fully supported. They start treating cinnamon as a rooting hormone. Those are not the same thing. Commercial rooting products are designed to provide hormones that encourage root formation. These hormones help signal plant tissues to begin developing roots. Cinnamon does not reliably provide those same signals. Cinnamon may help protect the doorway, but it does not necessarily tell the cutting to build roots. That distinction matters. Many easy-to-root plants already possess a strong natural ability to produce roots. Pothos, coleus, mint, many herbs, numerous houseplants. These species often root successfully under good conditions regardless of whether cinnamon is present. When roots appear, gardeners naturally credit whatever treatment they used, but sometimes the plant was going to root anyway. That doesn't make cinnamon useless. It simply means the success may have more to do with the plant's biology than the spice itself. The next claim surrounding cinnamon involves mold, and once again, the reality is more nuanced than most gardening myths suggest. Imagine looking at a houseplant pot and seeing a patch of white growth spreading across the soil surface. Many gardeners immediately panic. They assume the plant is diseased. Sometimes that fear is justified. Often it isn't. A surprising amount of surface mold consists of organisms feeding on decaying organic material rather than attacking living plants. This type of growth is frequently associated with damp conditions, limited airflow, and constantly moist potting mix. In those situations, cinnamon may help reduce some visible surface growth. The pot can look cleaner. The mold may temporarily retreat. But recurring mold usually points to an environmental issue. Perhaps the soil remains wet too long. Perhaps dead leaves are accumulating. Perhaps airflow is restricted. Perhaps watering habits need adjustment. The visible mold is acting more like a symptom than a cause. And that distinction is crucial. There is a major difference between harmless surface mold feeding on organic matter and fungi attacking living roots or stems. Treating the symptom without addressing the environment environment often leads to the same mold returning again and again. The surface changes, the conditions stay the same, and the cycle continues. Then there are ants. This may be one of the most surprising uses of cinnamon in gardening. Many gardeners sprinkle cinnamon around containers, raised beds, greenhouse entrances, or patio plants after noticing ant activity. At first glance, it sounds strange. Why would ants care about a baking spice? The answer seems to involve scent. Ants rely heavily on chemical communication. They follow trails marked by pheromones that help guide other ants to food and resources. Strong aromas may interfere with those signals. Fresh cinnamon can create a temporary barrier that some ants avoid crossing. And in many cases, gardeners do observe reduced activity immediately after application. But the key word is temporary. Cinnamon generally does not destroy colonies. It does not eliminate queens. It does not remove nests. It does not solve whatever attracted the ants in the first place. As the scent weakens, ants often establish new routes. Sometimes they simply walk around the treated area. Sometimes they return a few days later. The real question becomes why the ants appeared. In potted plants, ants occasionally take advantage of dry spaces suitable for nesting. In other situations, ants are associated with sap-feeding insects such as aphids, scale insects, or mealybugs. These pests produce sugary honeydew that ants eagerly collect. If those insects remain present, the ants often remain interested. So once again, cinnamon may influence the symptom without eliminating the cause. And now we arrive at one of the most important misunderstandings surrounding cinnamon. Not all cinnamon products are the same. Gardeners often hear about research involving cinnamon extracts or essential oils and assume those findings apply directly to cinnamon powder. But powder, extract, and essential oil are not interchangeable. The differences are substantial. A light dusting of kitchen cinnamon behaves very differently from a concentrated essential oil, and that difference matters for both effectiveness and safety. Essential oils contain highly concentrated chemical compounds. At inappropriate concentrations, they can irritate skin, they can damage plant tissues, they can burn delicate leaves, they can create entirely different effects than the original spice. This is why stronger is not automatically better. The moment a natural product is concentrated, it stops behaving like a harmless kitchen spice and starts behaving like a powerful chemical mixture. Many gardeners assume that because something is natural, more must be safer. Plants disagree. Countless natural compounds become harmful when concentrated excessively. That is why caution is essential whenever concentrated plant products enter the garden. A simple pantry spice is one thing. An improperly diluted essential oil is something entirely different. So if cinnamon is neither miracle cure nor myth, how should gardeners actually use it? The safest approach is surprisingly simple. Think of cinnamon as a small supporting tool rather than a primary solution. For seed trays, a very light dusting across the surface is usually all that is needed if you choose to use it. The goal is not to bury the soil under a thick brown blanket. Heavy applications can create crusts, interfere with watering, and potentially irritate delicate seedlings. More is not better. At the same time, focus on the practices that matter most. Use clean containers. Start with fresh seed starting mix. Provide strong light. Maintain appropriate temperatures. Allow airflow around seedlings. Water carefully. Avoid leaving the growing medium constantly saturated. These factors have far more influence on seedling survival than cinnamon alone. For cuttings, cinnamon may be used lightly on a freshly cut surface, if desired. Some gardeners appreciate the protective aspect, but when reliable rooting is important, proven rooting hormones remain the more predictable option. For surface mold, remove debris. Adjust watering habits. Allow appropriate drying between waterings. Increase ventilation. Correct the underlying conditions first. Then, if you wish, use cinnamon as a supplemental measure rather than the main strategy. For ants, view cinnamon as a temporary barrier, a short-term interruption, a way to disrupt activity while investigating the real source of the problem. Look for nests, check for entry points, inspect plants for aphids, scale insects, or mealybugs. Address the attraction, not just the trail. And this brings us to the final question. When is cinnamon unlikely to help? Understanding its limitations is just as important as understanding its benefits. Cinnamon will not revive a seedling that has already collapsed from severe damping off. It will not cure advanced root rot. It will not transform contaminated soil into clean soil. It will not replace proper sanitation. It will not eliminate a large ant colony. It will not reliably function as a complete rooting hormone. It will not compensate for poor drainage. It will not fix chronic overwatering. It will not replace good light. It will not create airflow where none exists. And it should never be applied so heavily that it forms thick layers across the the soil surface. These limitations do not make cinnamon worthless. In fact, understanding limitations often makes a garden tool more useful, because realistic expectations lead to better decisions. The gardeners who benefit most from cinnamon are usually the ones who treat it as a supporting player, not the hero. The real heroes are often invisible. Clean containers, balanced moisture, healthy roots, good airflow, adequate light, thoughtful observation. These are the factors that quietly determine success long before any powder reaches the soil. So does the $2 pantry powder actually work? In some situations, yes. It may help discourage certain surface fungi. It may provide minor protection around fresh cuts. It may temporarily disrupt ant trails. It may contribute to cleaner-looking seed trays when combined with sound growing practices. But it is not a cure-all. And perhaps the most valuable lesson cinnamon teaches gardeners has nothing to do with cinnamon itself. Every garden problem begins somewhere. A symptom appears, a leaf yellows, a seedling falls, a fungus spreads, an insect arrives. The instinct is often to reach for something we can apply. A spray, a powder, a treatment. Yet the most successful gardeners learn to ask a different question. Not what should I put on this problem, but why did this problem appear in the first place? Because healthy plants are rarely created by remedies alone. They are created by conditions. And when those conditions improve, many problems become easier to manage before they ever require treatment. The best garden remedies do not begin with what we can sprinkle on the soil. They begin with understanding why the plant became vulnerable in the first place. That lesson costs nothing, and unlike cinnamon, it never runs out.